So I'm joined with Paul Patu of Urban Family in Seattle. Paul, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Good to be here.
Paul, why don't you just start off and tell us a little bit about Urban Family, who you are, what you do?
My name is Paul Patu. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Urban Family. Really, this work is kind of a continuation of my parents' kind of legacy of service in Seattle, Washington in particular, and specifically working with marginalized Black and Brown communities. My wife is the co-founder, and her family is from West Seattle, and we are a biracial couple. I'm 100% Polynesian, South Pacific Islander, and she is African American. So we live the Black and Brown experience every day, related to both issues around social justice, as well as how do we create an environment in the community that is connected, safe, and cared for the families that we know, we love, and want to support.
Yeah, and I came across your work from a story that was focusing on the Community Safety Initiative. Could you just tell me a little bit more about that, how that came about, what you're hoping to do with that?
Absolutely. So our model really focuses around three specific areas, very strategic areas for us. The first is neighborhood safety, right? Neighborhood safety, the second being family support, and then the third being youth programs. When we kind of pause to reflect and really dig deep into our work, and we have upwards of 20 years of experience. Our organization is going on its 15th year in existence, so we've been in community for quite a while, dealing with a lot of the issues that sit at the forefront of how Black and Brown communities, try to attain wellness and an equitable future for us in this country, specifically with how things are now. So, and so with that, comes our neighborhood safety is really about the idea that, you are a product of your environment. And there are certain neighborhoods that have been designed and structured in a way that will either facilitate wellness or facilitate, kind of the negative aspects of our society, i.e. poverty, food deserts, a lack of resources for our youth and families, and what might be a small issue, an insignificant issue in a community with means, is a very big issue in Black and Brown communities, simply because there are no supports in place to be able to mitigate some of the risk factors in our neighborhood. And so the safety initiative really sprung up from a very difficult year in 2020, being COVID, George Floyd, and then the capstone, if you will, of the election debacle and all that ensued after that. And so the basic idea is really simple, and it's one that we believe the early movement of the Black Panther Party was really about. In the midst of the civil rights era, where police brutality was at an all-time high, and injustice, particularly in the African American community, was severe. And the Black Panther Party really sprung up out of the need for the Black community to first protect and provide safety for their community. And so, to that end, they get a lot of bad press from carrying around guns and their Second Amendment, kind of right to bear arms. There was a particular tactic to paint them out to be terrorists, when in fact they were just responding to the safety issues in their neighborhood. Everything from free lunch programs to free healthcare, and the idea of neighbors helping neighbors really sprung up out of that, that movement, right? And the Black community was actually intact and very healthy at that point, related to self-determination and them being able to provide for themselves. And so we take the good of that era, and this is kind of our version of not necessarily looking towards to any outside systems to protect our communities, but for us to really take the expertise that exists within our communities and the trusted leadership, community leaders, as well as organizations and just Black and brown people, to mobilize and organize around safety. Our 4 organizations, we kind of found each other again because we are all aware of each other in general. And we set our hearts on creating an initiative that basically brought back that sense of a connection and community. And so, the initiative is made up of 4 elements, 4 key components. The first is safety hubs. We are putting safety hubs in 3 targeted neighborhoods, Black and brown neighborhoods in Seattle, and 1 neighborhood in South King County here, known as Skyway. And so the safety hubs actually operate as a kind of hub of resources and services. It's their job to build those community connections and to kind of be the utility belt of resources that are needed in the community. The second element is our crisis response and safety teams, right? Reminiscent of, I'm old, man, came up in the era, I don't know if you remember the Guardian Angels in New York. And so the Guardian Angels were basically this group of civilians or basically just regular community folk that decided to do safety patrols, and with the berets on, and they were basically like a positive presence in the neighborhood, and they did regular routines and rounds around the neighborhood, and they knew neighbors by name, right? It wasn't just this kind of arbitrary or shallow connection to the community. They were from the community. And so in that same spirit, our safety teams, kind of trained by Safe Passage, Southeast Network, that's kind of their subject matter expertise, is around safe passage and providing, caring adults in community space to be able to, for community connections, and also to de-escalate and mediate situations that could potentially escalate into violence. And so there is that layer. And then our crisis response team, they basically manage some of the higher level neighborhood shootings, gang wars, gang intervention, and I want to make it clear that our role is not to be a replacement for law enforcement. I want to make that very clear. We do not want to do what the police do and law enforcement to some extent. We look at ourselves as a layer of safety support, a culturally competent and relevant way to engage our people, our community, because we have relationship, because we are rooted in our respective communities. Our engagement looks different, and what would take a white officer, a ton of resource to get to the bottom of, we can do in literally seconds because we have the connections and relationships to be able to engage at that level. And the other aspect to this is like one of the barriers, I think, to having a predominantly white law enforcement system is that they simply do not relate to our people. Like, they don't see their same likeness and their same image in our kids, and that's problematic. And so, that speaks to a bigger systemic issue around how do you get relevant and competent Black and brown law enforcement, and then have them go into the neighborhoods that they come from to support law enforcement in that area. And so, but anyways, back to the initiative. So that's the second component. The third component is about community resources and connections, right? This is the utility belt I was talking about, and really being able to, offer up support and provide resources, relevant resources, so our families are, so that they don't have to steal, right? And so they don't have to turn to criminal pathways to supporting their families. We all, at the end of the day, all of us want to live in peace and be able to provide wellness and a good future for our kids, right? All of us have that at our core, regardless of your ethnicity. And so what the last piece is in what we're calling Indigenous Black and Brown leadership, as well as quality training, not only in leadership, but also in crisis response. We are not fly by night. We have 15 years of being trained in really kind of urban combat related to responding to gun violence and some aspects of domestic violence, but more or less the issue, around gang intervention and gang violence. I think that's what kind of separates us and makes us unique in that regard. So those four key elements make up the initiative, and the goal of the initiative is to build community connections and safety for Black and Brown communities.
Great. Thanks so much for all that. Yeah, I love that you mentioned the Black Panthers and the Guardian Angels. I think those examples are sort of, people have drawn a lot of parallels to what Black Lives Matter has done in the last 5 years with Black Panthers. And I think, oftentimes what gets focused on in the media is, the protests, the rioting, the uprisings. But, I've been following the work of BLM for years, and they do a lot of work with youth, and they have a Black Freedom School. I know the chapter in Denver has been running that for a while, just doing real, radical education with youth to let them know about sort of the history in this country. And I think those things, and that's why I'm glad to talk with you here and give you a platform here to talk about some of this that you're doing there that may not be as sort of sensational or draw as much attention in traditional news media. So,
Sure.
yeah, let me ask you then about the conversation that you mentioned that kind of followed in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings last summer around the police. And you say you don't want to be a replacement for law enforcement, but some of what you're talking about, a lot of people have said that, we need to sort of rethink policing and demilitarize policing and think about resources rather than retribution. And so those kind of things that you're talking about with walking around the neighborhood, building relationships, getting to know the community, is there something that you think needs fundamentally reformed in the way that, I don't know how, if you want to say much about how policing in Seattle works specifically, or just sort of in broad terms, what your thoughts are on how police community interactions or law enforcement community relations need to change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is a great question in regards to like how we think about our safety, and then how the outside kind of media perceives safety in our communities, and then our lawmakers and how they create policies that lock in injustices that perpetuate, right? And I do think I think this is historically factual. The beginnings of law enforcement in this country come from a very dark history in our country around slave catching, right? And this idea of, outlawed slaves. And so I think we first have to acknowledge that if it comes from that philosophical base, and has its roots in that, and I'm sure it has more that is broader than that, but that to me seems problematic, right? And if you mirror their treatment of Black and Brown youth in particular, it looks exactly the same. and it doesn't really, it's almost like they look for a certain kind of character that fits their negative image of particularly Black males, and then they're on the hunt. And doesn't matter what they did wrong, or wearing a hoodie should not be a crime in our country. But I've seen it played out personally over and over again, and because I'm light skinned, and I'm married into the Black community, so I've had a certain connection and sit as a witness to my brothers and sisters in the African American community. They are treated differently because of the tone of the color of their skin, and the darker they are, the worse it is in this country. And from what I understand, it's not just this country. Like, this disease spreads globally, and even in Africa, there are similar kinds of treatment against darker skinned people, and it's just an injustice that we as a society can no longer tolerate. And so, I do think there's a lot of reform that needs to happen. I love the era we're in now, where they're actually releasing funding in certain cities to innovate out of that space. We've been given an opportunity and an allocation of resources to basically pilot something that we've been doing for many years, but now we're adequately resourced, and that makes a difference, right? Being well resourced and having the right people at the right table at the right time is all part of the initiative. And so I'm really excited about the initiative. I don't know if I answered your question, but kind of in a roundabout way, yes, there needs to be reform. And I think, though, not only in the hiring, but I think in the model of law enforcement and the philosophical underpinnings of what does safety really entail, right? And then how do we dig out those areas that have been problematic specifically for Black and brown communities?
Right. Yeah. And let me just kind of wrap up to build on that note about just kind of rethinking the way that we view safety and community and resources. The title of this project is called Raising Utopia, and I'm interested in people that are doing exciting things and thinking outside the box and trying to challenge the status quo, and just really celebrating that struggle to bring a new way of thinking or a new way of doing things into being. And so how do you view that question of, do you see yourself as a utopian thinker?
Not too sure about the word and how it hits for me. However, I've always been a disruptor. But I think I'm a hybrid of disruptor and peacekeeper, honestly. And I feel like where we're at in our country, particularly in America, is the movement for Black and brown communities. And I want to make it clear, when I use the term Black and brown, there is a reason why I start with Black first and then brown. And historically in this country, I think that we need to come full circle. The only way for anything to heal is if it first hits the air and it actually is exposed, so that healing can take place and the body's functions start to kick in, right? So I think in this country, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the harm done to Black people, Indigenous African Americans. It's been done, it's not new. Reparations and reparations conversations that are happening right now, they seemed far-fetched in the beginning. If you're looking at it from the power structure, right, and from the white dominant culture, it looked it's something that I feel like white Americans particularly shy away from, because it would be a disruption in a system that is of benefit and value to white people in general, whether they realize it or not, right? Think about this for a minute. the richest economy in the world was built by Black hands over brown bodies. Stolen people in stolen land. And so the foundation of this country literally has those things baked into the foundation, which means that anything, you can clear out the house, but if you never change the foundation, whatever you build on the foundation will eventually show up in the building. And so I think the only way to reset and to break up the ground, so to speak, is to first acknowledge that harm has been done, particularly to indigenous African Americans and Native Americans, before you can build a utopia or a connected community. Like, there has to be the acknowledgement first, and then the healing process can begin, right? And then I think all things flow out of that. And what I tell my white brothers and sisters all the time, this is not anti-white. This is pro-Black and brown healing. And all we are asking of our brothers and sisters is give us a moment to heal ourselves and to allow the Creator to help to heal our wounds so that we can be of service to humanity and to be able to offer up the gifts that all of our rich cultures have within them to all of humanity, And so that's the utopia part for me, hashtag move together, but there's definitely a lot of work that needs to be done before we get there. But I appreciate the question.
No, for sure. Yeah. And I'm trying to play with the title right now and think about what that means for me. And I think more about utopia in the sense that it's more a process of coming into being as opposed to some destination, trying to get to some perfect idealized space. But I like what you said in terms of being a disruptor and disrupting the status quo, disrupting the conventional ways of thinking about things and doing things. And just people are uncomfortable with new ideas. And then it's only until 10 years later, 15 years later, that things that were once unthinkable or unbelievable are actually in place as the standard.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. I am not a disruptor by choice. I have to be. Like, I feel like I've been pressed to the point of understanding my context, deeply reflecting on the patterns in my life and my people and the conclusion that I've come to, like, this is where I make my stand, and not only for me, because it's bigger than me, but for my family and for my community. This is my little way of giving back, So I don't disrupt because I want to. I disrupt because I have to. At the end of the day, I'm a gentle giant, brother.
All right. So on that note, let people know where they can find you. How can they get involved if they're in the area, or even if they're not? How can they sort of find you and pitch in to Urban Fam? Absolutely.
Yeah, you can reach out to us on www.urbanfam.org. Facebook, the same, Urban Family, Facebook at Urban Family, and then Urban Family 2.0 on IG. But yeah, we're on all the social media platforms, and yeah, tap in. If you're ever in Seattle, we'd love to give you a tour of our work, and hopefully COVID standards get better so we can actually break bread together.
Right on. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to just get outside of New England at some point. So.
Well, I appreciate it, Gino. Okay. Thank you. God bless you for your good work. And yep, hopefully our pathways cross in the future.